to ingest. Human flesh is just the best. Wrap a towel around your bowel so I do not make a mess. For dessert, let's have brain. It won't hurt if you can't feel pain. I'll have bouts of indigestion as I eat your large intestine. Any part, a human heart. And let's go with a la carte. I cannot choose between a thigh or breast. It's like a buffet menu. All these bones and sinew to digest. But I digress. Be my guest.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out our introduction video. There's a link to that in the description below. It'll give you a sense of what the Horror Movie Syllabus is all about, but in short, we take a particular subgenre of horror, and then we look at 3 movies from that subgenre. And today, what we're talking about are Romero zombie movies. And this is obviously a very niche, narrow, specific subgenre, because zombies as a subgenre is one thing, but we're talking a subset of that. We're talking about Romero zombies. So let me explain a little bit about why Romero zombies is a subgenre on the Horror Movie Syllabus. In the original drafts of the Horror Movie Syllabus, we had fewer subgenres, and zombies was just the subgenre by itself. And basically, it was mostly Romero movies. That's basically what it was. And it didn't allow us an opportunity to talk about other great zombie movies that were worthy of being included in the syllabus, because you couldn't justify bumping a Romero zombie movie because they were just too important. Hence the idea of separating the Romero zombie movies out and giving them their own subgenre to discuss. So basically it would free us up to next week talk about other zombie movies that are not Romero zombie movies. But I do think that separating them out was a good idea, because it lets us talk a little bit about the importance of the Romero zombie, what it does for the zombie subgenre as a whole, and then looking at other movies that both honor what Romero set up and also move away from it. So it gives us a lot to talk about. And it's important because there's a lot to talk about in the zombie subgenre. Now, we won't go into this too in depth right now because we're going to be talking about it again next week, frankly. But the zombie subgenre is really big these days. Zombie movies have exploded. And all of that is really due to what George Romero did in the movies we're talking about today. He's the instigator, if you will. He is the one who created the rules for what I'll call the modern zombie. Prior to Romero coming out, zombies were mind-controlled people tied into voodoo magic. And setting aside, the political correctness of that, that is what zombies was referring to prior to Romero coming onto the scene and doing what he did with the first movie we're going to talk about today. But the voodoo zombie is something I love quite a bit, actually, but it's not what people think of now when they think of a zombie. What they think of is what Romero created. And so this is a video just to celebrate that, frankly. There's a lot of stuff out there, a lot of material on these movies and on George Romero. I'm not looking to retread a lot of that ground. I'm here to talk about these movies because they're on the syllabus. They deserve to be on the syllabus. They need to be on the syllabus. And we'll talk about the things that they've done to create the modern zombie and how successful they were, frankly. So with that, let's go ahead and start digging into the Romero zombies. And we'll put them in undergraduate, graduate, postgraduate level like we usually do. But in this case, it's just going to be chronological order. It seems like the most logical way to discuss these movies because it's how everybody discusses them. So why don't we just go ahead and get right into it. The first movie that we're talking about today, the undergraduate level selection, is Night of the Living Dead. Night of the Living Dead came out in 1968 and is genuinely a bona fide horror classic. It's one of those movies you kind of have to see for your horror education. It's incredibly important to the horror genre, to zombie subgenre in particular, and it is really, really great and holds up to this day. If you haven't seen the movie, it's a pretty simple story basically. The dead rise from the grave. Suddenly the dead are reanimated. Nobody's really quite clear as to why, but people are trying to survive, and a group of unlikely people band together in a farmhouse to try to stave off the zombie apocalypse. And tensions run high, and people aren't necessarily getting along with each other, and we start to get confronted with the theme that we'll see throughout this video, which is man is the real monster. And we won't spoil the details of the movie in case you haven't seen it, but if you haven't seen it, like I said, you absolutely should see it because it's a bona fide classic. You need to see it. It's such an important film that it is, again, one of these movies that I am bending the rules for. This movie came out in 1968, like I mentioned. It's pre 1970, pre the cutoff that the horror movie syllabus uses for the modern horror film. But it's that important. It's that essential to horror and to zombies that it has to be included. It's I think the last time that we're going to want to breaking this rule, but it needed to be talked about. I wasn't going to put it on here, but I couldn't not put it on here. Every time I thought about it, I had to be on here because it's a quintessential movie for the zombie subgenre. You don't have the zombie subgenre without this movie. It really starts it all off. What Romero has done with this movie is created basically a new kind of monster. He's created what would become the modern zombie. People that are risen from the dead and are eating human flesh, kind of mindless. But it's worth noting in this movie, first of all, they're not even called zombies in this movie. That's kind of an interesting side note that a lot of people don't realize. And they're not exactly the lumbering zombie that we would come to know and love. They haven't quite become that yet. They still move fairly quickly. They can kind of use tools and stuff like that. But they are undead, or risen from the dead, and they do infect people when they bite. So some of the tropes are there. Some of the tropes have been established in this movie. Now, it's interesting because this movie, again, was filmed in 1968, but for whatever reason, there was some sort of issue with the copyright not being filed or something like that. I don't quite understand what happened, but it's a public domain movie, so you'll see this released on all kinds of different physical media because there's no copyright on it, so it's basically public domain, which kind of sucks for George Romero, frankly, because it's such a big and important movie, and he probably lost a ton of money on that. But what's nice about it is that it's allowed it to be very widely disseminated. It's very easily accessible. And like I said, if it's a movie that needs to be seen, which it is, it's nice that it's really easy to get a hold of it and see it. It's also a really well-made movie. Romero made this movie excellently and sometimes by accident. Like, it's in black and white, which helps make it feel almost documentary in style. Like, it was 1968. They had color back then. It didn't have to be in black and white. And I'm not sure if it's just for budget reasons, but for whatever reason, it's in black and white, and it does add a lot to it because it helps offset a little bit of the gore and kind of hide a little bit of the weakness of some of the special effects, possibly. But it also gives it like that kind of documentary real feel to it, which gives it a little bit more authenticity. The performances, by and large, in the movie are really quite good. None more so than Dwayne Jones in the lead role. And Dwayne Jones's casting is interesting because he is a black man casting him as the lead in the role in 1968 in America, which is not. It's just, and civil rights just ended, basically, civil rights movement. So it's pretty fresh. And he's the hero of the movie. And yet the way things go in this movie, there is a very clear commentary on racial politics in this movie that, according to George Romero, is not intentional. He cast Dwayne Jones simply because he was the best actor for the job, which is frankly kind of refreshing. But his casting gives this movie a whole different subtext, especially when you see the ending of the movie, which I won't spoil for you, but gives the movie such a subtext that to this day resonates very strongly. It really has a lot of poignancy and importance from a socio-political standpoint, and apparently kind of by accident. It seems like Romero kind of lucked into certain things in this movie, but I don't want it to take away from the fact that he made an excellent film and he's an excellent filmmaker. He did something brilliant with this movie. I doubt at the time that he had any idea the movement he was creating when he did this. I don't think that he really understood just how much he was going to be affecting the cultural zeitgeist in the future. I mean, the phrase zombie apocalypse is colloquial now. And that stems from this movie. It stems from George Romero. I can't impress upon you enough the importance of this movie, but it's also really, really good. It holds up extremely well. Like I said, the black and white just adds something to it. It just really holds up really well. Like some of the acting is a little bit, 1960s, but it still works. It still works well. The effects aren't necessarily top notch, but they're also very effective. The whole movie just has a vibe or a mood to it, and I credit Romero with that. That works out really well because of George Romero. He's done an excellent job with this movie. It's endured for a couple of reasons. One is its big influence, like we've talked about quite a bit, but the other one is just because it's entertaining. It's good. I think if you haven't seen it, if you watch it, you'll be surprised how good it is, how much it engages you, how much you get engaged into it, or how much you get invested into it. I think that you'll be impressed with how his filmmaking has endured over the years, and you'll understand why this movie is as popular as it is, as important as it is, as noteworthy as it is, and why I insisted that it had to go on the syllabus. So if you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. But I'm sure most of you have seen it. So let us know in the comments your thoughts on this. How do you feel about it? Do you dislike it? Do you think it's overrated? I'd be surprised about those things, but I'd be open to hearing your opinions on that. So share them in the comments below. The second Romero zombie movie we're talking about today, the graduate level selection, is Dawn of the Dead. Dawn of the Dead came out in 1978, so 10 years after the first movie, and is often considered to be one of, if not the best, zombie horror movie of all time. And I think I would endorse that. I would definitely say that I probably share that opinion. If you haven't seen the movie is the follow-up to Night of the Living Dead, and it takes place a little after the zombie apocalypse has begun. So people are still trying to figure out what they're doing to survive. And an enterprising group of people figure out that maybe holing up in a shopping mall would be a great way to wait out the zombie apocalypse. Only there is a problem with the mix of people being in there, and then when some different people show up, it gets a little bit more complicated. And of course, hijinks start to abound as they tend to do, and I won't spoil any of it for you. But suffice to say, Dawn of the Living Dead is another bona fide horror classic. It's another movie that you kind of have to see for your horror education, and it's another quintessential zombie movie. We discussed some of the things in Night of the Living Dead where the zombie tropes hadn't quite solidified yet. This is the movie where I think the rest of them solidified. This is the movie where you start to see zombies lumbering and not being, quite as smart, not being able to use tools, being less more mindless and less nimble. And I think that's where you really see this solidify. You also get to hear them called zombies finally. So this really is where everything takes shape. This is the movie where whatever wasn't already established becomes established. It's also, in my opinion, better than the first movie. And your mileage may vary on this, and I wouldn't fight you if you said Night of the Living Dead is better. But I really like Dawn of the Dead. It's a lot of fun. It's got a lot of things going on. It's also got Tom Savini, both as an actor and doing the makeup here, and that is key. The makeup effects and the gore in this movie are awesome. They've held up remarkably well. Yeah, you can kind of tell sometimes it's not really realistic, but they look fantastic. They look super cool. And it's a part of why I think this movie is as popular as it is and is why it's endured as much as it has. The setup is great. You have this group of people in a mall and they're just trying to survive, but there's distrust, there's personality conflicts, and then a group of bikers shows up and wants to take over, and that throws everything up. But it reinforces that message that we're going to keep talking about, that man is the real monster. You've got this zombie threat inside, but people just can't help but wind up fighting amongst themselves. It's an interesting message. It's one that resonates really well, and one that carries out through the zombie subgenre as a whole. We see it repeated over and over and over again, and it's a message that resonates really well and has a lot of poignancy and importance to it. The other theme in this movie that is talked about quite a bit, and it's a very good one, is the commentary on consumerism. And this one, unlike the racial commentary from the first movie, is admittedly more intentional. Romero is setting up the zombies and their assault on a shopping mall as a rather obvious commentary on mindless consumerism and people just buying stuff. And it's a message that resonated probably pretty well in 1978 and frankly resonates just as well today. consumer culture gone rampant, people buying stuff they don't necessarily need, mindlessly spending their money. I think it resonates pretty well, and it's fun, and it gives the movie a little bit more weight to it, makes it feel a little bit more important and less schlocky than might have otherwise come off. But you know what? Schlocky is fine. Like, this movie is fun. Like, don't let the social commentary, put you off on it if you haven't seen it. This movie's good time. There's a lot of gross stuff in it, a lot of fun stuff, great characters. The actors, by and large, are really good in this movie. My favorite being Ken Foray, but there's a lot of noteworthy people in this, and everybody's giving a great performance. It's a lot of fun. It's a good movie. That's not good. It's a great movie. I love Dawn of the Dead. It's a it's one of my favorite zombie movies, and I didn't really go into this in the intro too much, and I'll probably talk about it more in the next video. But I'm not a huge zombie fan because there's a lot of bad zombie movies out there. For me to like zombie movies, they have to be some of the better zombie movies, some of the best zombie movies. And this one, I'm not sure if it's my 100% favorite zombie movie, but it's probably top three. So it's a sterling example of what a zombie movie could and should be. Interestingly, this movie did get remade a few years back by Zack Snyder, everybody's favorite superhero director, Zack Snyder. And it's an exceptional remake. We did talk about it previously, and it's really, really good. It's a lot of fun. He really doubled down on the action and less so on the social commentary. So it loses a little bit of something in terms of feeling more important. But in terms of a wild ride, it's pretty good. It's got its issues. Like, about halfway through, it kind of starts to lose steam a little bit. But that first half, especially that opening scene, is fantastic. It's a great ride. One of the better remakes, frankly, in my opinion. But that said, it still doesn't touch the original. The original is an exceptional horror movie because of all those elements I've mentioned. Romero, really confident at the top of his game at this point, just delivering what he wants to deliver and delivering it so well. All the ingredients are pitch perfect to make that wonderful, like as I say, that souffle that rises. That wonderful alchemic kind of amalgamation of ingredients to make perfection. The movie, it doesn't need to be remade because it's pretty much perfect the way it is. I guess I enjoy the remake very much, but the original is where it's at for sure. If you haven't seen it, you got to see it. Again, truly bona fide horror classic. And of course, if you have seen it, let me know what you think. I'm pretty sure that you liked it. But if you didn't, let me know. I'll be nice. But talk to us in the comments below because this is one that definitely is worth talking about and talking about and talking about. And the last Romero zombie movie I'm talking about today, the postgraduate level selection, is Day of the Dead. Day of the Dead came out in 1985 and continues on from the first two movies. It is technically the same story, although the timeline doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's a little bit wonky, but I'll touch on that in a little bit. If you haven't seen the movie, as I said, the movie is following the zombie apocalypse, and we're deeper into the zombie apocalypse at this point, and we're following a group of scientists and military personnel who are holed up underground waiting at the zombie apocalypse, and they're doing experiments and studies on the zombies to try to figure out how to best address the situation, find a cure, or whatever you want to call it. But of course, when you put a bunch of people underground and all these personalities and stuff like that, as always, the theme of man is the real monster comes up and hijinks abound. And we'll stop there so not to spoil the movie, of course. But Day of the Dead suffers from a major issue. And that major issue is that it's a sequel to Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead, two bona fide horror classics. As a result, it wasn't quite as well received, and to this day, there's split opinions on it not being that good. It's kind of like the Godfather 3 of this series. Godfather 3 not as bad as people say it is, but it's not as good as Godfather 1 and 2. That's the same thing is true here. It's not as good as Night, and it's not as good as Dawn, but it's definitely not bad. The fact that it has that reputation is kind of infuriating because it's a good movie. And I think that there's been a shift in the perception in recent years. I think people are really coming around on it a lot more than they have in the past. The setup for the movie is arguably better than the first two. The first two have rather simplistic setups. This one's a little bit more complex and a little more interesting and has the potential to be a lot more fascinating and have a lot more going on. Whether or not it actually accomplishes that is maybe up for personal debate. And I think it kind of does. One of the complaints about the movie that is somewhat legitimate is that it has less action than especially Dawn of the Dead, and is a little bit more talky. but the talking that's going on there is really interesting talking. It's very philosophical, very interesting stuff, and really, you know, has interesting concepts to mull over and explore. But if you're, just looking for some hijinks, it's got those too, but you might feel like it doesn't have enough of them or they're not spaced out as well. So that is something to be, so that's a legitimate criticism of the movie. That said, I do like the setup. I do like the situation. I like that a lot of the movie is focusing on the struggles of people communicating and saying what they need, and how bad people, can influence things and take control of things, and really poison something from within. That's all fascinating stuff. Again, man is the true monster. It really, more than the other movies, really comes into play in this one. It's also interesting because it starts exploring, the possibilities of what can be done with the zombies, and can they be taught, for example. And there's the famous Bud the zombie, who's the, quote unquote intelligent zombie, who's learning how to potentially speak and use tools and things. Fascinating stuff. Sometimes the argument is that it doesn't quite go far enough with this. Again, I'm kind of forced to concede that that's a little bit true, but I do like what they did with it. I do like that it has enough of it there for me to think it's a good time, and a movie that's got enough going on that I think it's still really, really good. I wouldn't call it a bona fide classic. Nobody does. But it doesn't measure up to the two bona fide classics that came before it, but it's still an excellent, excellent movie. Now, like I alluded to earlier, these movies are all tied together. They all follow each other, but the timeline is all messed up because while they are occurring in chronological order, they are also set in the time period in what they're filmed in. So, Night of the Living Dead, 1968, and Dawn of the Dead in 1978, and then, of course, Day of the Dead in 1985. They're all taking place in the years they were filmed, but they're all taking place, within a matter of, weeks, although Day of the Dead comes later. And I'm not going to get into this too deep because my friend Josh over at Movie Timelines has gone into this in detail and explored all this and explained it all away. Thank you, Josh, for that. So I just wanted to bring it up to point out that these are sequels to each other, but the timeline, you just kind of have to give it this conceit that every time you're watching it, it's set in the current timeline, but they are all happening, and just kind of roll with it, frankly. And I'm okay with that. It works for me, and it works for me because the internal logic of the movies, it flows. Like while the timelines don't make sense, there's not really a conflict here. The event has happened, and people are addressing it or reacting to it in their time period, and that all makes sense. It all works, and it works really, really well. The three of these movies together tell a very fascinating and fantastic story that has resonated for years, and we've seen it. We've seen it, and we're going to explore it more next week. But we've seen how influential they are. Now, what's interesting though is that the first two movies are bona fide classics. This one less so. People argue about whether this one is good or bad. Nobody seems to think it's on par. I guess there's a few people that think it's their favorite, but that's kind of rare. But what do you think about this? Have you seen it? Do you like this one as much as the others, or more than the others? Or do you think like me that it's good but not quite as good as the others? But if you haven't seen it, you should definitely see it. You should see the other two first, of course, but you should definitely see this one because I think all three of them together make one nice, tidy little package. So that's going to do it for our Romero Zombies subgenre, exploring the three quintessential Romero zombie movies. But you'll notice I'm not calling it a trilogy because there's not three of them, there are six of them. And I'm putting the other three as extra credits. So let's get into those right now. The first extra credit we're going to talk about is Land of the Dead. And Land of the Dead came out in 2005, and once again is in the same zombie universe as the first three movies, only this time it's much later in the zombie apocalypse. And of course, being filmed in 2005, it's got a much different look, a much modern look, a little bit slicker, a little bit nicer. There's a little bit more budget involved in this. And opinions may vary about how successful this is, but I think it's quite successful. If you haven't seen the movie, it's kind of what I was just saying. It's taking place later on, maybe a couple years into the zombie apocalypse, and society has kind of found ways to address this. And there's a sanctuary city, a city that's kind of walled off from the zombies, where people can live relatively normal lives. And the zombies outside trying to find their way in, and they're starting to get smarter and learn how to use tools and organize and things like that. And hijinks abound, of course, as they tend to do in these movies. And of course, I won't spoil it for you. But I like this movie for a couple of reasons. And again, this is a movie that, has mixed reviews. People like it, people don't like it. Nobody thinks it's as good as the three that we talked about on the syllabus. And I would even agree with that too. But it's it's not far off. It's coming close. And in terms of message, I guess is where I'm going with this because all of Romero's zombie movies tend to have some sort of commentary in them, some sort of social message or something like that to kind of give it a little bit more deeper meaning than just zombies attacking people. And in this one, this is one of the ones I think resonates pretty well, and to this day resonates really well, which is class struggle. The haves versus the have-nots. The zombies being outside of the city and trying to organize and get their way into this city that they are quite literally physically excluded from. It's an interesting concept and one that's arguably not very subtle, but it is effective. I do think it works rather well. I think the zombies look cool in this. I think the story works pretty well. The action scenes are good. It works. It's a good movie. Again, another one of those things, not unlike Day of the Dead, where it suffers from comparison to its predecessors, but I think it fits in rather well. It's definitely Romero. He's definitely doing his thing. And while you could argue he's a little past his prime, and the movie's maybe a little past his expiration date, I think it winds up ultimately being pretty successful. I think that this movie doesn't have the same following, but I do think it's kind of gotten a bit of a following. I think it's a little bit more of a cult favorite now, but I would definitely recommend checking it out. If you like zombie movies for sure, and if you like Romero's zombie movies, you should have seen this already, but if you haven't, you should check this one out. It's good. It's a fun ride, and it's got something to say, so I think it's still successful, and I think it's maybe not on par with the originals, but definitely worth mentioning and definitely worth your time. So if you haven't seen it, check it out. And if you have seen it, let me know what you think. Are you one of the people that like it? Or are you one of the people that's like, not so much? The next extra credit movie I'm going to mention is Diary of the Dead. And Diary of the Dead came out in 2007 and once again set in the same zombie apocalypse universe. And it's done in a found footage style, which is a fresh new thing for the series and arguably for Romero as well. We can talk about a little bit if that was a good thing or not. If you haven't seen it, the movie, again, does take place in the same timeline as the other movies, but it's actually like right at the beginning of the zombie outbreak. It's right at the beginning of the apocalypse. But again, set in its modern time setting of 2007. So it's got, everything's shot found footage style. People are documenting it, documenting the early stages of the zombie apocalypse through their cameras. And we get to see firsthand what's happening, what's going on. I won't spoil the details of it for you in case you haven't seen it, but this is the one that a lot of people tend to say falls short, and I'm kind of forced to agree. The first time I saw this movie, I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. I like found footage movies, so I was into it, but it wasn't great. It was just fine. It doesn't really hold up well on subsequent viewings for a couple of reasons, but the biggest one, the most obvious one, is Romero's not really a found footage horror maker. He couldn't let go of the idea of wanting to have it look good, which normally you would appreciate. You'd want your movie to look good because found footage movies oftentimes don't look that good. That's part of the point. But he would have like multiple cameras where they were doing multiple angles and people just filming things that they would not film. And, that whole found footage trope of, people filming when they should be filming, it's really on display here to the point where it's actually distracting. It doesn't make sense. And the idea that somebody puts together and overlaid music over it when their friends were dying, it like when you stop and think about it, it falls apart. It doesn't work. And honestly, the commentary gets a little lost as a result of it. In this case, he's kind of focusing on, the media and the way the media is exploitive and takes these natural disasters or these horrible things and uses it for entertainment purposes or to get, clicks or revenue or ratings or whatever. It's an interesting idea, not necessarily the most revolutionary idea, frankly, but like I said, it gets lost because the found footage winds up being distracting. The characters, unlike in the previous movies, especially like Dawn of the Dead, for example, you're not connecting with them. You're not in love with them. You don't really care that much what's happening to them. And so a lot of this, it just doesn't hold together very well. I think that the found footage idea was a great idea, but in execution wound up being rather poor, at least for what George Romero likes to do. He might have benefited from just making this a straight movie that had maybe some found footage elements to it, some scenes that were shot found footage style. That might have really saved it. But as a result, it doesn't hold together. It falls short. It's a disappointment because for me, at least up till now, all the movies have been really good. And this is the first one where it's like, not so much. So it's kind of disappointing. If you haven't seen it, I'm not necessarily recommending it to you other than for completion's sake. You could definitely skip this one. You're not going to lose any sleep. Your horror education is going to be just fine if you don't see this one. But if you have seen it, I'd like to know if you like this movie a lot, if you think this movie's on par with the other ones, let us know in the comments why. Because if I'm missing it, I'd like to know. Like I said, I don't hate this movie. I'm just disappointed in this movie. This is the one where the comparisons to the others really, really hurts it. Because on its own, it's fine. It's fine. It's a little bit funny and silly because, again, of the found footage mistakes, if you will. But it just doesn't hold up to the other ones. It just doesn't. But I'm mentioning it here, so watch it if you want. And let me know what you think. And the last extra credit movie I'm going to mention is Survival of the Dead. And Survival of the Dead came out in 2009, and as you'll notice, these movies are starting to come out more and more quickly. It used to be there's like a decade between movies, and now he's cranking them out kind of every other year. And while I can't say for sure, I can hypothesize that that might have had something to do with how they came out and the quality of them. If you haven't seen Survival of the Dead, the movie takes place in the same apocalypse timeline as the other movies, but it's a little later in the timeline once again. And the story is about an island where these two families have managed to mostly weather the storm of the zombie apocalypse, but they have differing views on how to approach the zombies that actually are on the island. And they're also not super welcome to newcomers, and the newcomers that have come to the island are in for some hijinks, as we like to say. There's a lot going on in the movie, but I won't spoil it for you here. I will say this, though. There's a lot going on in the movie, and it's an interesting concept that, for whatever reason, falls a little flat for me. It's not bad at all. It's just not that memorable. When we talk about the George Romero zombie movies, this is the one that I tend to forget about. And it's not that I forget about it existing per se. I just forget the details of it. It doesn't make an impression, good or bad, on me. It's just kind of there. And that arguably is maybe worse than, say, something like Diary of the Dead that is like bad. I don't think Diary of the Dead is so bad it's good, but at least I remember it. I remember being disappointed in it. Survival of the Dead was fine. It's not a bad setup. It's got some interesting characters, and it's got some decent gore. Everything in it is, again, it's fine. The metaphor this time is, I'm not even sure, it's a little bit muddy. Something about wartime or tribalism or something. I'm not quite sure. I've read a little bit about it. I did a little bit of research in preparation for this video, and even then, the ideas behind what was the metaphor or theme of the movie were a little bit muddy. And that might be part of why this movie doesn't feel as memorable as the other ones, because all the other ones have some sort of theme that they're trying to talk about, debatable whether or not they're successful at it. But this one, probably not very successful at it. It really just kind of feels like he made the movie to make the movie and didn't really have a lot to say. I guess that's what I think is my hang up about this. It feels like Romero didn't have anything to say. You're just cranking a movie out, and it wasn't well received as a result. Now, the poor reception to it is unwarranted. It's not a bad movie. And so I think that the reaction was probably because it didn't measure up to the classic originals. It was a little heavy-handed. It was overly critical. And then maybe that, kind of slowed Romero down. He didn't do any more zombie movies after this. And of course, he didn't live for too much longer after this. But it's a shame, because I would have liked to have seen him go out with something a little stronger than this. But again, it's not a bad movie. It's not like it's not worth your time. I wonder if you watch it, will you retain it? Will it stick out for you? Because it doesn't really for me. I've seen it more than once, and it's fine. But I don't revisit this one a lot because it doesn't really call out to me that much. So have you guys seen this movie? If you have, let me know. Do you remember it? Does it resonate for you? Do you remember this one well? And if people haven't seen it, do you recommend they check this one out other than for completion's sake? Do you like it better than Diary of the Dead? Let us know in the comments below. Let's talk about this one, because this one, I don't know. I'm kind of lukewarm on it, so I'm kind of be curious to see what you guys think of it. So that's going to do it for the Romero zombie movies. We talked about all 6 of them, and they are, of varying quality, but super important as a whole, as a collective. And as a collective, I think they work very, very well. Like I said, we'll be talking more about zombies next week, and we'll be talking about the influence that these movies had. But as you know, they've had a huge influence, and that's why I wanted to give them their own spotlight here, give them their own subgenre, so we can talk about what they reaped, what they gave birth to, if you will, in the future. So we'll get into that next week. But for now, it's time for us to answer a trivia question from Horror Trivia Pursuit. As you guys who watch the videos regularly know, this is the point of time where I like to ask myself a question here on camera and see if I can answer it on camera or if I embarrass myself. And I like to give you a little bit of time so you can answer at home and then let me know in the comments if you got it right. Today, we're looking at the monster subgenre, or monster category, if you will, on the card. And in this one, the question is, in 1932's The Mummy, what actor played the titular character? Oh, wow. Man, I feel like I'm going to get this wrong, and I'm kind of scared that I'm going to get this wrong because I know I should know this. I know I should know this, but I'm gonna stick with my gut answer. Even though like there's that little voice in the back of my head that's like, you've been trusting your gut and these videos and it gets you in trouble every time. But I gotta trust my gut. How can I not trust my gut, right? I know though if I get this wrong, some of you are gonna just be like so ashamed of me. Kenneth Connolly, I'm looking at you. I know that you're gonna be so ashamed of me if I don't get this right. So I'm scared. I'm actually scared to give my answer now. And for those of you that think I should edit these out and cheat on this, no, man, I keep it real with you guys. You know, Professor Victor is very, if nothing, if not honest with you guys. You know, we have that trust amongst each other. So you guys are honest with me in the comments. I'm honest with you on the video. I'm going to let you know if I screwed this one up. I know that the answer I'm going to give is a correct answer, but I don't think it's the correct answer. My fear is that the person that I'm going to say is somebody that played the titular character of the Mummy, but not in 1932's The Mummy. That's my concern. So we'll find out about it. The Mummy's not one of my favorite of the Universal monsters, to be honest with you. I'm making excuses now, but I do tend to push the Dracula, Frankenstein, Wolfman, even Invisible Man probably before the Mummy, frankly, but that's just me making excuses, to be honest with you. I should know this. So I'm going to go ahead and give my answer. Hopefully you've got your answer locked and loaded already. My answer is Boris Karloff. Even though Karloff is more famous for being, the Frankenstein's monster, I'm pretty sure he played the Mummy at some point in time, and I'm hoping he played it in 1932. So let's take a look and see if I'm right or wrong. Oh, thank God. Oh, it's Boris Karloff. Thank God. Oh my God. I was literally getting stressed out about that. I've gotten wrong answers before, but that's one that I feel like I should know. I am clearly not an expert in what I call classic horror, pre-1970s horror. My boy Kenneth Connolly, who I just name checked a little while ago, kind of more the expert on there. And if you guys go and read the comments, he usually drops you some knowledge on that, and you should absolutely check it out because he knows so much about it. But that said, I love the Universal monsters. I do. So I would have been feeling really bad about myself if I got that wrong. Thank God. It's that self-doubt that gets in your head, you know. I got last week's answer wrong. It was kind of embarrassing. So I got gun shy, guys. I did, but thankfully I've redeemed myself at least for this week. We'll see what happens in the next week's question. Did you guys get Boris Karloff, or did you think he was just Frankenstein's monster? Did you guys know the answer to this one? And if you didn't know it, who did you guess? If you said Lon Chaney Jr. If you said Lon Chaney, then you gotta let me know. Or Lon Chaney Jr. Either way, let me know. Or if you said Ron Chaney, you definitely gotta let me know if you said Ron Chaney. Wrong answers, put them in the comments if you had them. But that's it. Thank you guys for sticking out to the end. Thank you guys for talking about Romero zombies with me. I know there's a lot of other places you can go to get information about Romero zombies, so I'm glad you guys were here. Had another good time, and we're gonna have a really good time. If you like zombies, definitely gonna have a good time next week, so come in for that. But until then, class dismissed.